Welcome to CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Coming up, the clock is ticking as the Democrats continue working on a spending bill in hopes of getting it done by the end of the month. We'll bring you the latest on those efforts. Plus, a dangerous threat. The Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah promises revenge on Christians in Lebanon.
Nasrallah does have the backing of much greater powers than him when he makes threats. They are not empty.
A possible civil war in Lebanon and what it could mean for Israel and the Middle East. And how one young man left his American Muslim life for Christ by the living witness of his grandfather.
But I also saw what his relationship with God was like. So I followed my grandfather into prisons as he did prison ministry. I followed him into nursing homes as he delivered groceries to elderly people.
We'll have his story and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin in Washington, where President Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress are considering dramatic cuts in the spending bill. This after the president lowered the price tag from $3.5 trillion to a little less than $2 trillion. As senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells reports, the package would still be a massive expansion in social services and climate change policies.
The president is scaling back his ambitions with political realities in sight. He has no Democratic votes to spare, and there's pressure to reach an agreement by Halloween and before the president heads to Scotland for UN climate talks. Wednesday, he returned to his birthplace to sell his latest plan.
This has been declared dead on arrival from the moment I introduced it. But I think we're going to surprise them, because I think people are beginning to figure out what's at stake.
The new version will likely eliminate a clean energy plan, a path to permanent legal status for some immigrants, and plans for tuition-free community college. It's also likely to put a deadline on the child tax credit, extending it for only a year. Still in the mix, paid family leave, child care subsidies, and $500 billion for climate change. The White House is also considering new ways to pay for the proposal. One idea is to drop increases on corporate tax rates while adding a tax on capital gains.
These bills are not about left versus right, or about moderate versus progressive, or anything that pits one American against another. These bills are about competitiveness versus complacency.
But Biden still faces opposition, even within his own party, from Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Wednesday, the magazine Mother Jones reported that Manchin is considering leaving the party, reports he forcefully denied.
I can't control rumors, and it's bullshit. Bullshit spelled with a B-U-L-L capital B.
Manchin objects to a quick transition away from fossil fuels, but more progressive Democrats want exactly that, and especially before the president appears at one of the most ambitious climate change meetings in years.
The Senate must put together a climate package that is something that Joe Biden can say to the rest of the world that we are the leaders and not the laggards.
Before he leaves next week, the president wants Dems to agree to a package framework and to pass the $1 trillion traditional infrastructure bill, which strengthens roads, bridges, and internet. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Senate Republicans blocked a Democrat-led federal voting rights bill. The act would have set nationwide standards for voting access, like same-day registration, a minimum of 2 weeks of early voting, and making Election Day a national holiday. Republicans called the bill a federal takeover of elections. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said it sends government money to political campaigns, allows Washington to interfere in state redistricting, and takes voter ID requirements out of the hands of local officials. The measure lacked the 60-vote minimum needed to overcome a Republican filibuster during Wednesday's failed vote. It's now been 6 days since 17 U.S. and Canadian missionaries in Haiti were kidnapped. The FBI and Haitian authorities are negotiating a $17 million ransom demand. Today, Christian Aid Ministries is holding a special day of fasting and prayer, asking believers around the world to join them in seeking God for his mighty hand to work. They're praying specifically for the victims' release, endurance, Christ-like love, and faithfulness. and for the kidnappers to experience the love of Jesus and to turn to him. They're also praying for government leaders and authorities as they work on this case. Here are some other stories we're following in the CBN newsroom. Prices for airline tickets are on the rise just before the holiday season. United Airlines CEO is warning passengers to brace themselves for the increase. He says higher jet fuel prices are to blame. Right now, there are still deals available, but industry analysts say by Halloween, many of the deals may be gone. Most airlines got rid of cancellation and change fees, so booking now can be a good move to save some money. A name change may be in the works for tech giant Facebook. The Verge reports an official announcement could come as early as next week. The goal is to help the company refocus its brand on virtual and augmented realities, not just social media. Former President Donald Trump is starting a new media business to take on big tech companies. It will have its own social media platform with an app called Truth Social. Former President Bill Clinton released a video saying he is on the road to recovery. This after being admitted to the hospital with an infection last week. Here's what he had to say.
Hi, everyone. I was so touched by the outpouring of support I received during my stay in the hospital. Thanks so much. I'd also like to thank the doctors and nurses at UC Irvine Medical Center for the absolutely wonderful care they gave me over the last 7 days. I'm on the road to recovery, but I want to remind everyone out there, take the time to listen to your bodies and care for yourselves. We all have work to do, and each of us has an important role to play in life and in the immediate future. I, for one, am going to do my best to be around to keep doing the most good I can for a long, long time.
Good advice to listen to your body and take care of yourself. Well, coming up, the next volatile situation in the Middle East could land one nation in the middle of a civil war, and what that could mean for Israel, the Middle East, and the world. We're going to have that story when we come back. Welcome back. Lebanon could be facing another civil war. The Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah is vowing revenge after 7 of its supporters were killed during a gun battle in Beirut last week. On this week's episode of The Global Lane, Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman explains why Lebanon is erupting and the danger the conflict may pose to Israel and the Middle East.
I think the most honest and reliable person in Lebanon today is Judge Tariq Bitar. He is the individual who has been leading an inquiry into the devastating Beirut port explosion that took place a little over a year ago, when 1/3 of the city of Beirut was almost leveled, not due to an intentional act by any surreptitious forces where they might have blamed Israel or they may have blamed the United States, but because of the sheer incompetence of the previous Lebanese government that had decided to stockpile tons of ammonium nitrate next to a fireworks factory, and eventually a chain reaction set that blast off, which when you looked at it, you could have perhaps mistaken it for a small nuclear device. Now, a year and a half later, after the query has really started moving forward, and Judge Bitar is moving forward with trying to indict, investigate, prosecute, and eventually bring to justice those officials who are being investigated for acts of gross negligence, all of a sudden, because of the fact that the main minister who would have been implicated in this act came from a Hezbollah-related political party, we now see members of the Hezbollah terror organization marching again on the streets of Beirut, threatening other Lebanese minority communities. The main target of their ire is the judge who's investigating their political allies. Now, this has not stopped Judge Bitar from going forward. And a coalition crisis under interim Prime Minister Najib Mikati has now led to the point where Hezbollah is calling for blood for those who were only defending themselves on the street of Beirut in those attacks which took place last week. So right now we're on the precipice of, I don't want to say it's going to be a civil war, but definitely an ethnic action that may take place, or an ethno-religious action that may take place as Hezbollah is looking for revenge.
And it seems like Sunni and Druze and Christians are united in this against Amal and Hezbollah. This week, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah threatened Samir Jaja's Lebanese forces, saying Hezbollah has 100,000 fighters ready to take up arms. Is Nasrallah miscalculating, or is this just political theater?
I think at the end of the day, Nasrallah is speaking from a position of strength. It's not just that he has 100,000 fighters. He also has the support of Syria and Iran backing him. So before anything happens with trying to find a way in which to get out of this mess that Hezbollah has currently found itself in after having lost 7 of its terror organization, or 7 of its supporters of the terror organization on the streets of Beirut last week, you have to take into context that Nasrallah does have the backing of much greater powers than him when he makes threats. They are not empty.
And he still has tens of thousands of missiles on the southern border, targeting Israel and communities across the border. If extensive fighting begins, how likely is Hezbollah to attempt to draw the IDF into the fray by attacking Israel?
Well, this has happened twice in the past. Once in the 1976 beginning of the Lebanese Civil War, and also in the 1982 First Lebanon War between Israel and Lebanon. It was really between the Palestinians in Lebanon and Israel. But that was where the Hezbollah movement was born, out of that first round of fighting. Now, I think that you have to take into context that if Nasrallah has to face Sunni, Druze, and Christian opponents locally, and he tries to deflect by letting off the Lebanese rocket valve, or the Hezbollah rocket arsenal, which can act as a pressure valve for him, by launching attacks against Israel, Israel has threatened to turn southern Lebanon into a parking lot. This is just something that was said by a top IDF general, where he estimated that an excess of 2,000 rockets could be expected per day to land on Israel in a future Lebanon-Israel conflict. And it won't be a war between Hezbollah and Israel. It'll be a war between the state of Lebanon and Israel, since Hezbollah effectively controls Lebanon. So Nasrallah is playing with fire if he thinks that he has the ability to threaten Israel, to even attack Israel and to get away with it. I'm not sure how the other ethnic groups and religious groups factor into this. But if they see an opportunity to fell Hezbollah, they may sit this conflict out if it ever happens with Israel, and let Israel do the hard work.
I think all those groups are just tired of it all. Okay, Greg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
For a look at more important trends and stories in the news, watch The Global Lane. It's tonight at 8:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel or on the CBN News app. Still ahead, the powerful testimony of a life lived for Christ by one grandfather and how it brought his Muslim grandson to salvation. We'll have that story right after this. Thanks for staying with Newswatch. A young black man raised to be a Muslim in America finds Jesus thanks to the witness of his grandfather. His journey to Christ was told earlier this year in a series on our YouTube channel called Souls and Stories with CBN's Emily Jones and Josh Doyle of Uncharted Ministries.
What was it like, that moment that you walked into a church for a first time? How was it different from a mosque?
Yeah, I mean, when you walk into a mosque, you have designated sections for women and children and a space for the men. And so, you know, I would come in and usually a really big space where there's already people there, you know, prostrate on the ground. And so we're doing a series of prayers, and it's very solemn, right? It's very quiet. The only thing that you hear is you hear the call to prayer, and then you'll hear the words Allahu Akbar, right? So you hear that, and then you're practicing these things, and you're prostrating yourself and humbling yourself before God. So it feels like very much of a sacred, solemn space in a mosque. Whereas when I went into the church, it just seemed like so much freedom, right? Everybody wasn't doing the same thing in unison, but everybody was worshiping so freely with joy, seeing people sing songs to God, and that this could be, and praying that this could be, man, God can, in whatever space I'm in, he'll meet me here. And so it was a different type of sacredness that felt like so much more freedom in the way that they carried themselves before God. And so I think that was what was so attractive to me, to seeing Oh man, it seems like God cares about them exactly where they are, and He has such a love and a freedom for them that they can express themselves just exactly. They can express exactly who they are, and so I saw just a stark difference between being in a mosque and hearing the call to prayer and the solemnness of it versus being in a church and even just honestly just having the conversations with people and talking to them was a little bit more foreign because in a mosque you're not really talking or interacting with other people. This is the space for you to interact with God, and so the environment of the two places is such a stark contrast.
Mm. And Tyree, there's a critical moment in your journey. You're in your car with your grandfather, and you're debating who God is. What did you discover in that moment?
Yeah. So I think in that conversation, what I had been taught growing up was, Allah is God and Allah means God, and this is how we serve Him, right? And so all the times that I had grown up going to prayer and all those types of things, my grandfather's here coming and talking to me about Jesus and that Jesus is God. And I say, well, Allah means God. So I know that Allah is the true God. And so as we start to argue kind of back and forth, I'm a young kid, but I really believe in this is my identity and my family of origin. And so as we keep going back and forth about this, he mentions two things which really just hit me so hard, which was, when he spoke to God, he didn't have to speak Arabic, that God would understand him and that he could speak in English, and God would not only hear him, but that he would answer his prayer, right? And then he would say, man, I don't have the way that I pray is not dependent on a location. It's not dependent on me doing a certain thing. I can pray right now and know right here, even as I'm driving, and know that God would hear me. And there was such a relational aspect to that I had never experienced before that made me curious at that time, but I was still kind of stubborn in the fact that this is what I was raised in and this is who I know God to be. And so we got into a debate there, but it kind of set me thinking on some things. And I think that the other key part was I was able to watch his life. And so I not only heard him talk about Jesus and the difference that Jesus made in his life and how he could pray and have this relationship with God, but I also saw what his relationship with God was like. So I followed my grandfather into prisons as he did prison ministry. I followed him into nursing homes as he delivered groceries to elderly people. I also will see him go to his church and serve.
That's so beautiful, Tyree. What is it about how God deals with sin and forgiveness that drew you to Jesus?
Yeah. I think I really came to a clear understanding at that time. Not at that time, but when I got to college, I think that started my journey into understanding more about God. And I had tons of questions when I started to break away from Islam about what we practice and why we practice as Christians. And so my grandfather answered a couple of questions for me. He gave me a Bible and said, you have to investigate for yourself. And as I started to do that, I think what I still had, though, was from remnants of being a Muslim, was I still had this idea of I had to be a good person, right? I had to have my works outweigh my the bad, right? The good outweighing the bad. And so I think what the freedom that the gospel gave me is once I had the conviction in college that, no, the good guy image that I had built up at that time seemed to be smashed. And my whole identity in being a good person was in pieces, and I couldn't put it back together. And it left me in a depression at the time when I was in college. And I felt like when I heard about, for the first time, the love of God, it was, well, right now, I don't even love myself, right? I don't even want to be here right now because my identity was built up in this thing, and now I can't be that. And so because I can't be that anymore, because I'm not this good person that I'm trying to be so bad, I don't want to be here. But if God loves me like that, like you say he does, then I want that. I want that because I don't even love myself right now. And so it gave me such a freedom to be able to say, man, if God can forgive me and if he can love me in spite of the fact that I don't even love myself right now, I want that. And I want to know more about that. God, show me more of this. And so when I heard of that, I called my grandfather immediately. I left the meeting that I was in and I said, I get it. I finally get it. And at that moment is when I understood forgiveness and I understood the gospel.
And you can find the full interview with Tyree on our YouTube channel, along with much more from CBN News. Just go to youtube.com and search for CBN News. Coming up, brothers in arms discover they are also brothers by birth. We'll explain when we come back. Stay with us. It's the story of a long overdue family reunion with some amazing coincidences. An adopted Army Major General served for 20 years before finding out his biological family was closer than he realized. Robert Edmondson reunited with his two half-brothers at Fort Knox in Kentucky. One of them also serves in the Army.
If I could sum it up in one word, that one word would be love.
A number of emotions came to mind. Number one, I was raised as an only child, so I immediately had siblings.
Edmondson's fellow soldier, now a younger brother, served in the same division, pledged the same fraternity, and get this, both their sons share the same birthday. They all say they are excited to have found each other. Sounds like a movie to me. I don't know what you think, but it sounds like a great movie there and a wonderful way to end Newswatch. That's it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.